Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. The policy fight over how to address gun violence is coming to an end at the State House this year, but it does so under massive public scrutiny following mass shootings in California, Texas, and Ohio. Here to discuss three bills that were at the center of debate are Representative Catherine Rogers, a Democrat from Concord, and Representative Darrell Abbas, a Republican from Salem. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
And we do want to note that all of these bills are on the governor's desk at the time of this taping. There's a very strong chance he's going to veto them later on Friday, but at this time, unknown. So we're just going to talk about the merits of the bills. We're going to start with you, Representative Rogers. HB 109. This is one of the ones that you wrote to expand background checks to all commercial sales. Tell us what it would do and why you think it should be law.
The background check bill basically closes the loopholes that exist now. At this point, the Department of Safety estimates that roughly 33,000 of the estimated 82,500 gun sales that will occur next year will not be required to have background checks in New Hampshire. That's a sizable amount. This would bring in a large amount of those. There are exemptions for bills that are private sales or transfers to family members. If you know the person and you know their background, you would not be required to do that. There are safe rules for that. The bill would take in the required bills for the loopholes that exist for gun show loopholes and that kind of thing. So it would expand it and bring in safety for other areas. The other two bills that are talked about, one is the wait list.
Oh, we'll get to that, yes.
Okay, I was going to try to
You made your points there. Okay. We want to get to Representative Abbas on background checks. Representative, this is something the President and some Republicans have hinted might be on the table. In your opinion, you serve on the Criminal Justice Committee, are expanded background checks in line with the Second Amendment?
So it depends on how far the background checks go. I mean, I think the majority of individuals do support background checks. And right now, the background checks are in place, from what I've seen, are working. They're designed to keep firearms out of the hands of criminals. And the federal background checks alone does cover that. I went on a ride-along with the police officer in Salem, and they served a couple of summons to different gun store owners. And what it was for is that the owner stopped an illegal sale of a firearm for someone who was trying to purchase a firearm, but the background check, they lied on the application, and the background check actually caught that. So the background checks, in my opinion, are working as they are. It never hurts to keep reviewing them to make sure that they're working as times change. Now, in respect to HB 109, I will say some of the verbiage in that, it's very confusing, some of the language in there. And I'll give an example. The definition of commercial sale will include a gift. So a sale, a gift, those are conflicting words. And then when you look at an individual will still have to conduct a background check on a transfer, but then it says it's an exception. So there's a lot of conflicting language in the bill. And the way I interpret that bill is that it ultimately makes it so difficult for private transactions to ever occur. It essentially eliminates that and would require these transactions to go through licensed gun stores. But what I see in New Hampshire is that our gun laws in place are working. New Hampshire is one of the safest states in the country to live in, and we don't have the issue here where firearms are being sold and used to commit crimes on a regular basis.
And yet we're one of the largest exporters of crime guns in the country. Our state exports 3 times as many guns as we import, and the crime weapons around the country, we're one of the largest states. So while the crimes might not be occurring in our state, our guns are going into other states and being used for crimes. So we have to think of the fact that we are a regional, we've seen the regional aspect with the horrific accident that happened in the North Country recently, where the fact that Massachusetts wasn't checking things that happened, it might not have been happening in their state, but it happened in ours. So here's a case, again, where it's a regional aspect, that the safety of other states is being jeopardized by us not having a tight enough background check.
What's your response to that, Representative Abbas?
And that's a fair statement, and I will say I know the ATF has published information on firearms at the point of sale, and if at any point in time, if that firearm's ever used to commit a crime. I think they refer to it as time to crime. And for a firearm sold in New Hampshire, if it's ever then subsequently used in a crime, the average time period is over 8.5 years. So although there are incidents where a firearm is sold and then someone were to commit a crime with it, I would say the majority of these instances, it's not happening instantaneously. And we live in a society, a free society, and there are crimes that occur, but it's not something that I think instantaneously is going to stop what we're trying to stop.
Representative Rogers, moving on to HB 514, so we can get to everything. This is a 3-day waiting period for the transfer after a purchase of a firearm. Is this going to actually stop someone who is motivated, or is it just going to delay something terrible from happening by 72 hours?
No one thing is ever going to stop somebody intent on killing another human being or killing themselves. However, we do have statistics that have shown that specifically on suicide rates, for instance, suicide rates drops precipitously with waiting periods. One example that I can cite is South Dakota had a wait period, a 48-hour wait period. They subsequently repealed that bill. The year after they repealed it, their rates went up 7.8% of suicides. So we do know that when someone attempts suicide, the most complete way to do it, or the best success, is with a gun. We've shown in various states and in various places where the wait period have gone in, that the rates have dropped, as I said, precipitously. We know that they will decrease quickly. So there will be some aspect of saving it. Will it stop everything? No. No one bill, no one thing is ever going to stop anybody intent on killing someone or killing themselves, but it will slow them down. And that's the thing, that we've got to start doing something. The rates of not just mass shootings. I mean, the mass shootings, we've already had 255 of them in the country this year alone. More shootings than there have been days in the year. So we need to start looking at what we can do. So will any one of these bills stop it altogether? No. Nothing will stop all violence. But the question is, what do we do? What kind of things can we do that will have impact a little bit at a time? And each of these bills will have some aspect.
Representative Abbas, HB 514, a 3-day waiting period.
So in respect to the waiting period, and that waiting period can actually become longer if it goes into the weekend or over a holiday. But the waiting period, they call it the cooling off period, whether that impulse is to cause harm to oneself or to another individual. But the opposite of that is if you're on the receiving end of threats, or if you're a victim or someone's threatening to commit a violent crime against you, or if you're a victim of domestic violence, you're also now being subjected to that 3-day waiting period, that cooling off period, where arguably if you're the victim of the threats or the violent crime, I don't believe you're the one that needs that waiting period or the cooling off period. And what I think we should be really focusing our attention on is that we have an individual through impulse reaches a point in their mind, whether it's fueled by anger, hate, or it's mental health, that they've reached a point where they want to now cause harm to themselves or someone else. We should be focused on recognizing that behavior, because I do agree with my colleague to my left that if we're slowing them down, but we're ultimately not solving the problem. And I think we should focus our energy on how does that person get there, and what can we do to either prevent them from getting there, and if they do reach that point where they want to cause harm to someone else or themselves, that we can pull them back, because they were not always at that point in their life.
We can do that too. It's not that we do one or the other. We need to look at these as a conjunctive thing and do everything at once. If somebody is going to perpetrate a crime on someone else, it doesn't mean we don't look at their mental health as well. But mental health is not... Just because someone has mental health problems doesn't mean they're going to go out and perform an act of violence. And we shouldn't hoist that upon the mental health community. It's unfair to say just because someone wants to perform an act of violence, they're mentally ill. And if someone is in a domestic violence situation, introducing a gun into that situation is not always the best way to go. That's not going to help them solve their problem. So giving them a gun and saying, oh, this is going to help protect you, is not always the best way to go. I think we need to look at that seriously. And yes, we need to prevent domestic violence. We need to prevent mental health problems and the breakdown. But we don't need to do those and exclude also looking at our gun violence problem.
And we want to get to, before we wrap up, HB 564, I believe it is, the safe school zones, gun-free school zones. Start with you, Representative Abbas. Is this an infringement on people's rights?
In my opinion, it is. And when you first look at or hear about the bill and making it a Class A misdemeanor to bring a firearm onto school property, it sounds like a no-brainer. Of course, we want to keep schools safe, but then when you apply that law to the reality and you look at it, it's like, well, what it's really doing is preventing law-abiding citizens from carrying firearms on school property. It doesn't actually solve any legitimate objective, in my opinion. And it's not just the United States Constitution, the Second Amendment, it's New Hampshire's Constitution, Article 2A. In order to pass that scrutiny, it would have to be narrowly tailored the legislation and would have to promote a legitimate government interest. The testimony that was before the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee, I don't believe any of the bill sponsors testified that they thought that this legislation would specifically prevent any type of mass shootings at a school. What the issue that was raised the most was that if someone's on school property and they're believed to be, if someone's believed to have a firearm, the school automatically would go into a lockdown. And they were saying that these lockdowns cause a lot of stress and anxiety in the students. Now, my argument to our opposition to that was, well, first of all, if the schools are not already doing this, they should be doing it, but they're probably doing simulations of these lockdowns anyway, and no one's complaining about the stress and anxiety that that causes. But in respect to school property, you know, if the legislation was written to say, well, maybe perhaps you can't open carry on school property while the school's in session, that, in my opinion, is narrowly tailored to serve that legitimate objective. But school property, I know in Salem, for example, there was a vacant piece of property in Salem that was 14 acres. I didn't even know it existed, and I've lived in there the majority of my life. It's unoccupied, and no students are going to be on there for school activities. But if you walked on that property, you would be now committing a crime.
And Representative Rogers?
The bill has been amended so that it does, in fact, cover a lot of the questions he's talked about. But also, I would just remind my colleague that the Heller decision, Justice Scalia, no great liberal himself, did rule that the Second Amendment can be limited and it can be regulated so that it can narrow things down. And one of the things they specifically talked about in the Heller decision is the ability to limit bringing armed weapons and firearms into government buildings, school zones, this kind of thing. So there is a provision that the Supreme Court has ruled on this. And this bill basically talks about children being able to go to school and not have the fear of having a gun come in there. The bill does talk about that the school boards have to have a public hearing prior to putting this in. It talks about the fact that people can't have it in their car when they're coming and dropping off children or picking them up. So there are provisions that answer a number of the questions that were raised when the bill was brought forward. So it protects people's Second Amendment rights. It doesn't make it particularly arduous to be able to deal with it, but it does prevent people from coming onto the property having a gun strapped to their hip when they're coming in there to just do regular business. It does stop some of the fears. And we do need to talk about a lot of kids that are very scared by and traumatized when they see on the news every night of various school shootings happening.
All right, Representative Rogers and Representative Abbas. Wish we had more time, but we've got to wrap it up there. And of course, if these bills are vetoed, the issues are likely to return again as this debate is not going away. Thank you so much.